citizen.
Out of many
we are world citizens. Same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
I'm Arthur Kanigis, welcoming you to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast, where each week we have exciting solutionaries, many other programs concentrate on all the incredible problems of the world. And boy, there are plenty of those. But what we focus on are people who have solutions that can help us to shift this culture of violence and domination to a culture where all of us are creating this people-powered planet. And today, we have a super special guest. We have Rob Kall, who heads op-ed news. They've published articles with mine and many other people, the stories that are missed by the big press. It gets it gives all of us a voice to help reach the world. And at the same time, he also has an incredible background of empowering people. And we're mainly going to be talking today about his fabulous book called The Bottom Up Revolution. The Bottom Up Revolution, this book is like an entire encyclopedia of everything you need to know in the world about how we the people create power in the world. Rob has interviewed so many extraordinary, all the just most crucial people around the planet, from the high and mighty to the people on the grassroots at the bottom, who are helping change the world. And he integrates this with having an incredible knowledge of an amazing number of books he's read and everything. You get it all put together in one book. He puts the whole world together for you. And I like the book so much, I had to get it both in the book version, and in Kindle, so that I could, write notes and create stuff in Kindle and add footnotes. So I'm kind of going back and forth through my book and Kindle, trying to absorb all this fabulous material in the amazing book you wrote. Because I found I didn't have enough pieces of paper to highlight it all. I had to go to Kindle where I could really highlight it. So anyway, I want to welcome our very special guest. So why don't we start out with you just giving us a little overview of what is this book about?
Well, I'll give the credit to opednews.com. I started this news and opinion website, and the more I gave power to the members to participate in making decisions on it, the better it did. And so I became fascinated with the idea of bottom up. And I started interviewing people with a take on it. And it ended up becoming a radio show, the Bottom Up Show. And I've done over 450 interviews since I started it. And one of the ones that really influenced me the most was with Darshan Narvaez. She was a professor. She's still what do you call it? She's retired, but she's a professor at Notre Dame. And she wrote a book called The Neurobiology of the Development of Human Morality. And I got a copy of the book sent to me. And with that title, it put me off so much, I didn't read it for like 6 months. But then I finally started reading it, and it wowed me. It was just an amazing book. It actually won from the American Psychological Association the Best Psychology Book of the Year award, the William James Award. And the main message is humans evolved over millions of years to be bottom up people living in bottom up cultures, except for the last 3 minutes of human existence, since civilization appeared. And civilization appeared different times in different places. It was 10,000 years ago in the Middle East, but it was only 500 years ago in South America for some. Although there were also civilizations of a different kind in South America, like the Aztecs and what have you. But
so if I understand it right, there was a time when women actually had more power, when we didn't have wars, when we didn't have conflicts. Well, we had conflicts, obviously, but we had a whole different way of resolving them. Is that right?
Absolutely. And we had a different way of looking at ourselves and the people around us and our culture. What Narvaez basically puts together is that our nervous systems, our hormonal systems, our endocrine systems, they're all designed to interact with other people the way that humans did for several million years. And that was in a hunter-gatherer band, not a tribe, smaller than a tribe. Anywhere from 30 to 80 people make up a band. And these people depended on each other to survive. So they had to think, how is my behavior going to affect everybody else? How is it going to affect the nature around us that we live off of? Because we're collecting and we're gathering and we're hunting. And so this changed the way that people saw the world and themselves. That changed their worldview. This is really the indigenous worldview that still exists for maybe 250 million people around the world.
And is it true? What is the role of women in these traditional societies?
Well, I think that varies. I mean, Riane Eisler has written a couple of books about this, talking about how there were times when women were kind of in charge. She doesn't like to use the word matriarchal because that's like the equivalent of patriarchy. And women didn't function that way. It's not like they were dominators. So yes, there were times in the past when women were in charge or women were the leaders. And but I think more important, it's the way that people related to each other. You know, I've interviewed a number of anthropologists, and I'm fascinated by the idea of billionaires. I think it should be illegal to be a billionaire. It should be a crime to be a billionaire. You should not be allowed to have that much money. And I've been writing about that for almost 10 years now. And so I asked these anthropologists, if somebody decided to hoard 50% or 80% of all of the band's or the tribe's resources, what would the band or the tribe do to that person? And the answer is a couple things. Kick them out, treat them like they're insane, or if they were, let's say, up in northern Canada, they'd put them on an iceberg and push it off and into the ocean, which is basically.
But isn't it not the individuals that's the problem? Because isn't it a systemic thing that pushes them into that? You mentioned in your book several soft power initiatives that started ground up and things like some of the whether it's Facebook or other things, but then evolved into kind of the more power hierarchy because the old dominator culture then came in on it. What do you see as the rising of the entire population in the direction of bottom-up governance, of bottom-up control of a society? How do you see that emerging and breaking through these old barriers?
I think we have to reawaken the bottom-up eyes. We have to reawaken the bottom-up worldview in people. Indigenous people think that way. If Native Americans have a saying, make a decision based on how it'll affect the next 7 generations. We need to teach that in schools. We've got to get that into our kids, and we've got to get adults thinking that way. We've got to challenge every top-down hierarchical domination place in our culture, in our system. And we've got to look for bottom-up ways of doing it instead. For example, you got a president who wants to give away $3 trillion. So how do you do that? The inclination, the way it's usually done is give it to a big company in chunks of hundreds of billions of dollars. And I don't believe in that. I think that one example that Obama gave that worked nicely was the cash for clunkers deal. He didn't give money to the manufacturers. He didn't give money to the companies in Detroit. He basically said to the auto sellers, we're going to give you money when you sell a car to somebody and they trade in an old gas guzzler, so that it wasn't hundreds of billions or millions of dollars that were being handed over to the car companies. The car companies had to negotiate and deal with each individual, and then the individuals got their credits, and then those credits went to the car companies. That's a really bottom up way of doing things. And I don't believe that we should be giving out billions or hundreds of millions or tens of billions of dollars to any big company. Like that's not the way to do it. It's a way, if you do that, there's so much leakage, there's so much grift that whatever ends up trickling down to the people is a fraction of what it was supposed to be.
My dad always used to say that trickle down didn't work, but siphon up sure did. If you give the money to the people at the bottom, don't worry, the people at the top, they'll have plenty of ways to siphon up the money. Just give it to the people at the bottom.
That's right. But at least the people at the bottom get a chance at it.
Yeah, well, and they got to buy something and use something and spend something and enhance their lives as the money was passing from them on to the back up to the top. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at some of the questions that Gary was dealing with. You watched our film, The World is My Country. And in it, Gary talks about like a major world shift of how we can shift from this top-down dominance model of governance that's divided and tearing up our planet and has huge empires threatening to destroy the entire planet with nuclear war, putting huge amounts of money into funding that military-industrial complex to fight each other, and how we can create some bottom-up alternative to that. Talk a little bit about how the bottom-up theory applies to the relation to what we're seeing, well, so astoundingly in our world today. We just saw 20 years of this war on terror, billions and billions of dollars, and the most powerful military in the world not being able to beat the folks in Afghanistan, and Russia before that, the entire Soviet Empire couldn't beat them. And then before that, we couldn't beat the Vietnamese in the jungles of Vietnam. And before that, the French couldn't beat them and the Chinese couldn't. If mighty powerful empires, can't really beat up on these small people and win, do we have to shift the whole idea that there's such a thing as military power? And well, let's start with that.
Well, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book where he talked about the idea of David and Goliath. And there's literally research that shows if you try to take on a major power using their weapons, their strategies, and their tools, you're going to lose. But if you do it differently, like David did, not wearing the heavy armor and using his own weapon so that it wasn't a hand-to-hand combat, which Goliath expected, then the odds of winning triple. They go from like 20% to like almost 70%. And there's a history of this. People actually can win. And this is confronting power. So, I think that's what the Taliban did. They used their resources, their strength, their families, their community, and that was what enabled them to stand up to the United States. Now, I don't think that's the answer you're looking for, though. I think the thing is, we have entrenched power that's been around for so long. We in the United States, we say we have a democracy, but really it's a kind of feudalism. To become a senator, you have to have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 million dollars. And what happened in Georgia last year this year, what happened in Georgia where those two senators were elected was an unusual situation, very different. And I'm not even sure it can be that easily replicated. But we've got so many millionaires elected to Congress. That's a problem. And I think we need to think about the big picture, and we need to think about it in small ways too, because I really believe, as others have said, that it's a million small acts that are going to change the world.
So what are the ways, tell us a little bit more about your reactions to Gary's idea about how we could develop a synergistic bottom-up people-powered democracy, not one that was one side wins, the other side loses, but one that kind of brought together the highest and best wisdom of each individual and amalgamated that into the wisdom, into the will of the people of the world.
I think it's a beautiful vision, and it's one that I'd like to see happen. The problem is, you've got, especially after Trump was president, we have a plague of narcissists that have been unleashed, a plague of psychopaths who now think it's okay to do what Trump did, which is basically exploit people and use them. And that goes against this whole idea of a people-powered planet. You've got a culture that allows people to be predators, basically. So we got to do something about that. And I've written a lot about that. I really think that we've got to identify the people who are acting like predators, and they've got to be treated a different way. I think that just like there are sexual predators, there are narcissistic, psychopathic predators. And they make up anywhere from 2 to 10% of the population, or 12%. Among corporate people, it's more like 15 or 20%. We have to deal with them. We have to, no matter how good we are, if they're out there conniving and grifting, then that's a problem.
You've interviewed an incredible number of business people who've been disruptors, who you had an old system that seemed like it couldn't fall. It was way too powerful to fall. And then some disruptive invention came along and a new technology. Well, we saw that you talk about it throughout history. We saw how the printing press did that, how we can create new technologies that can somehow disrupt the seemingly all-powerful, impossible to beat, the psychopaths that are running things, and suddenly something new can emerge. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Let's talk about the printing press. Gutenberg invented the printing press, and one of the first things that some people did was start to print Bibles. Now, that made people's heads explode, because before the advent of the printing press, what did it take to make a Bible? A monk sitting for 6 months or a year handwriting a Bible. And who had access to those Bibles? The church and royalty. And that was it. So what did they do when they started printing Bibles, which were a threat to the power of the church? They made a law. What do you think that, if you read my book, but the law was, if you possess a Bible, you get the death penalty, because it was power. It was a bottom-up way to unleash the power of the word of the Bible to everybody. And that changed things. So the people in power created laws to make it harder to do. And I think that as we struggle to get to a place where we have the idea of the world as my country and a people-powered planet, we're going to have to deal with people lashing out and lashing back and fighting it. And that's got to be a part of the consciousness of it. The way that we can deal with that is, I think, through education. I think through entertainment as well. I write in the book about how there's a hero's journey concept. And during Occupy, I went to see one of the early Avengers movies. And I left it thinking, this is so top down. One powerful guy saves everybody. And I thought, why not make stories where the hero is the people? The hero is the crowd, and everybody saves the world. And there are some like that. But I think that we need to have the people who write these things. I've tried to get to Shonda Rhimes, one of the most popular TV series writers. And I think that if we could get the creators of the stories that touch people, that could go a long way towards getting everybody to start seeing the possibilities. Because it's, so many people feel they don't have any power. Now, Joseph Nye wrote the book, The Future of Power, and he talked about how power's changed, because it used to be that the only people who had power had hard power, which is money and weapons. Now, anybody can have a blog or a YouTube channel or a podcast, and they have power. And all of a sudden, the nature of power has changed and access to power has changed. So people who always thought they were powerless are no longer powerless. And I think that part of it is a generational thing. I mean, I've got grandkids who are using iPads and computers who are 3 years old and even younger. And I think they're going to think very differently, and it's going to change the world just as things change like that.
What you said about the entertainment industry is very, very dear to my heart. That's my life mission right now, is to create a new hero's journey where the hero is all of us. In our movie, The World Is My Country, I asked Leonardo DiCaprio, he's giving this 11th hour press conference and talking about how humanity is teetering on the edge of doom and wiping out civilization and life as we know it on the planet. And I asked him the question. I said, and I asked the same question to a scientist. A scientist told me it's too late. We're past the tipping point. It's there's nothing we can do. The planets, we're going to be all toast. And I said, you're a scientist and you're extrapolating from current trends, but I'm a movie maker, and I know that in the movie, just when things look darkest and it's so hopeless and there's just no way out, a hero comes along and saves the day. And I said to DiCaprio, who's the hero who's going to save the day? And DiCaprio's answer, the hero is all of us.
That's right. Now I heard that. I paid particular attention to that. Yeah, he's a good man. He's the kind of person who is a person with power and influence who is trying to wake people up. I mean, when I sign a copy of my book, I usually say, may this book further open your bottom up eyes. And that's really what if people can just see a couple different ways that they can connect more with other people, that they can be interdependent, that they can cooperate more, either with as an individual or as part of the groups that they're in. I mean, we need coalitions of people to make this happen. There are thousands or tens of thousands of people who are all trying to make us go in this direction. And we have to, Paul Hawken writes about this as well. And we have to do that. We have to cooperate with each other. We have to identify common goals and shared dreams, and then work towards them together.
Well, in the entertainment industry, you interviewed one of the big moguls, Mike Medavoy, one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. And he said that that soft power was what America had in the world, and was so much more powerful and effective than the hard power. While in Afghanistan, 20 years of hard power battling these people couldn't beat them. If instead we had shifted to soft power and used both education, movies, films, and so on, women would be liberating themselves. There wouldn't be a Taliban. There wouldn't be, what happens is every time the forces of repression say we have to protect your freedom by fighting the bad guy, they become the bad guy, and the bad guy gets to be more of a bad guy, and both guys get worse and worse and worse, and we the people are the losers. But when instead we use that kind of soft power, and so many of the stories, when I read that with Medavoy, I thought, well, God, so many of the stories we put out are like you said with the Avenger, the top down, the bad guys rule. Even some of the kids' movies, like I didn't like The Lion King, because it's all about restoring the powerful leader to the throne, the rightful leader. Well, what about all of us people? And I think you're so right that we need bottom-up stories, and that these bottom-up stories can have the soft power that, just as Medavoy said, the U.S. could use it as a weapon for dominating the other empires in the world. How can we, the people, use the power of story as a soft power that brings down all of these mighty empires, and it doesn't bring them down, makes them become so little and irrelevant that we hardly notice them, because we, the people, are already coming together and evolving the solutions to our world's problems and rendering them sort of less and less of sort of a little curiosity that we wouldn't have to even pay attention to.
That's it. We've got to build better systems that are more attractive, so that people are attracted to them instead of the old systems that exploit them, and that basically create a predatory situation where they are used and taken advantage of. And I think we can do that. Like single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all. It started in one small province in Canada, and it spread. And I think that that's what's going to happen in the United States too. That what's going to happen is one state's going to have it. All of a sudden, those employers are not going to have to pay what they're paying for healthcare. People are going to be attracted there. They're going to get jobs there. Entrepreneurs are going to start businesses because they can leave their jobs because they're going to have healthcare. They're not going to have to worry about losing their healthcare if they leave their job. And what's going to happen is the states around them, they're going to lose people. They're going to be not as competitive, and they're going to realize we need to do this too. And so we have to create these systems, and we have to make them happen. Now, another way to deal with this is to think about business. Business is very hierarchical. Business is all about top down. You got a president, you got top level managers, and on down. It doesn't have to be that way. And there are over 500 companies that are working with non-hierarchical management structures that empower the people in a very different way.
You know, I agree with you so much. And I used to talk with Gary about his idea of shifting from that top-down hierarchical chart to Bucky Fuller's geodesic domes theory. And what he said is, you know, if you take an organization and you take this kind of an organizational chart, sure, the president is on top when it comes to kind of administration and coordination. But if you shift that and you come over here to the janitor, he's on top when it comes to making sure the bathrooms are clean. If they're overflowing and there's no toilet paper, there's nothing, the whole organization shuts down. But supply is on top of the world, because if they're not supplying toilet paper and cleaning supplies, he can't do his job. But personnel's on top, because if they're not paying the bills, nobody's going to take care of anything. And so each person is an integral, crucial part of the structure of the whole of that company. And he talked about using this as kind of a model for global governance. Integrity talked about it, where small groups like these Zoom talks, but cross-cultural, with people from opposite sides of the political spectrum, from Arabs and Israelis and so on, are coming together, not to decide who's right and wrong, but using powerful new tools of interactive, you know, like revolutionary conversations and all these other things, the ways that we come together to find out what is it that we all really want, and what is our highest and best aspirations, and then bring that together. You know, the multiple small groups, bring those together, amalgamate that into the will of the people of the planet. So I'm very interested in what you're talking about how we shift that model from top down and create these new emerging technologies that totally disrupt and change that old system.
No, it's not just new. It's also very old. I think we have to start paying attention to indigenous wisdom. They have so much to teach us. They are our elders in a lot of ways, and we can learn from them new ways to us, but they're old ways for them. And it's not just ways of doing things. As I've said, it's ways of seeing. It's a different worldview. We need to have an indigenous worldview, a decolonized worldview. You know, most of the world is colonized, except maybe, you know, Europe, and Europe was the colonizer. And the colonized were first the indigenous people. But the reality is that most of the people in the modern world are suffering under the colonization models and systems that exist. So you and I are also colonized as well. And we have to decolonize the way we think about ourselves.
Well, indigenous people understood the power of a story, and indigenous cultures all around stories, and stories that help model the ways we behave in society, that help create the changes that we need, and help bring order to the society through the power of story. So I'm so interested in what you said about creating this new hero's journey, where where all of us are the hero, and creates that new story. Tell us a little bit more about how we use that indigenous soft power of storytelling to help change our world.
Well, you know, when I had that kind of epiphany during the walking out on the Avengers movie, I thought to myself about Chris Vogler. He wrote the book, The Writer's Journey, which is a brilliant book, just came out with the 25th anniversary edition, that basically applies Joseph Campbell's concepts of the hero's journey to the writer and to writing stories. And I sent him a note. Can we talk about a bottom-up way of doing this? And the first time I ever had anybody do that, he sent back, "Woohoo! Yes."
Yay, great. Well, I love that. I'd love to be in connection with him. His book was what was the key Bible that empowered me when I was creating Gary's story, The World is My Country, when I was creating the movie, My Country, the World is My Country. And what we had to do is we followed that chapter and verse, and I worked out a script that for what Gary was going to say on stage, and we were sitting there at Melanie's house. She's on this podcast, hammering it out word for word, going over all things, coming up with what the story is. And he would tell these fabulous stories, and I'd say, Gary, that story is so fantastic, but it doesn't fit into the hero's journey story arc. It'll have to wait for another time. It's in his book, it's in other places, but that was out. And we kept the whole storyline on that hero's journey story arc. And if you watch the movie, you'll see that it follows that. And you'll see how Gary goes, climbs up, gets all these incredible mentors, he reaches the high pinnacle, when he's there at the velodrome and they're shifting the whole world with the whole world watching and getting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights passed. And then he plunges down and then is brought up into this other curve where he's heading over there to try to go to Germany to rebuild, and he goes to the borderline and meets the woman he loves and climbs up there and then plunges again and down into the depth of his dark night of the soul, and then comes out of that dark night of his soul to finally be empowered to recognize what Eleanor Roosevelt had told him years before. She said when he interrupted the UN and said, why doesn't the UN create a government of by and for the people? She said, she wrote in her My Day column across the country, how much better it would be if Mr. Davis and his group just went ahead and did it. And, he was stunned. He couldn't take it back then. But after going through that hero's journey, reaching that dark night of the soul, he found that spiritual power he connected with a guru, and finally was able to meet with a top lawyer and find out that, yes, you can create governments. You just are created by declaration, and went ahead and declared a government of, by, and for the people of the world. Very just the nascent model. But then he actually went to Washington and put it into effect and started to actually create this government that's to this day putting out world passports, world IDs, world birth certificates. I've got mine right here. But anyway, and so we made the whole story on that hero's journey story arc. And I used that book, The Writer's Journey, to do it. So I'm so glad you interviewed him.
Do you think that your listeners and viewers are familiar with the hero's journey?
Go ahead.
Joseph Campbell wrote a book, Hero with 1,000 Faces, because there are 1,000 cultures that all have hero's journey myths. It's a universal aspect of the stories that people tell all over the world. Just like smiling or angry faces are. Those are common throughout the world as well, and they mean the same thing everywhere. To me, the hero's journey is a process of being reborn, of becoming a new person. Now, you talk about the hero's journey arc. I believe that the hero's journey applies to everybody. You get headaches and you go to the doctor, and you've had headaches for 10, 20 years, and you finally go to the doctor. Your family may say, well, you're really not going to get any help, but the hero's journey is about making a decision. You're going to change your life and you're going to become a new person. The hero's journey for a culture could be about changing the culture, changing the system. And the thing is, with the hero's journey, you get an invitation. And then, and I think that with Gary Davis, his invitation was the guilt that he felt of killing people. Mm-hmm. And then he had a call to do something about it. And when you accept the call, you cross a threshold by either doing something or not doing something that you usually do. And then usually in the myths, you go into underwater or in darkness, which is like being in the womb, and you're being reborn. And then you're in the process of discovering who you are, discovering new resources, new skills, new tools, new allies. And that's all an essential part of becoming the hero. And the hero is somebody who saves his or her world or culture or family. And it's that learning process that does it, and that's exactly what you did with the movie with Gary. He's stumbling along, he's making a mistake here, he's taking a brave stand, and the next thing you know, he's in trouble again. And I think that every person has the opportunities on a regular basis to have hero's journeys. Now, what I got from Chris Vogler, the author of The Writer's Journey, is the idea of a collective hero's journey. That was the term he used, collective. Now, you got to know that collective is a buzzword for conservatives that makes their heads explode. They think that that is communism or socialism. So, this whole idea of a people-powered planet is communism. It's socialism, according to conservatives.
You talked about a disruptive app or disruptive, technology like the printing press, but then later, like all these other things. The automobile makers didn't have to lobby against or fight the horse and buggy makers. So they just invented something new, and then the thing shifted. Or we see that throughout. One of the early top-down disruptors, one of the first things to go viral really was when people saw the chaos of meetings, and a military officer called Robert invented Robert's Rules of Order, and that really went viral. So that all over the world we see people in parliaments and all these different people using that structure that basically has the 51% win, the other 49% lose, and it's a win-lose democracy, but it comes to some conclusion out of the chaos. It seems to me that I wonder if we couldn't create a new app that empowers groups all over to have a more collaborative and powerful way of out of chaos coming to decisions that was more decentralized and people-centric, and that could be as disruptive as that, to become a tool that was so valuable to people that it helped them interactively begin to connect with building people-powered governance.
Well, one of the problems, Doug Rushkoff has written a couple of books along these lines, I think his book was Throwing Google Under the Bus. Basically, some of the technologies that have been really exciting, like Google and Facebook and Twitter, they've started out as bottom-up kinds of technologies, but they end up getting taken over by top-down control. A lot because the corporative model, they take them public. They've got a responsibility to the stockholders. And so you've got a Facebook that is incredibly invading our privacy and exploiting our data, for example. And they're not accountable to anybody. Nobody. It's amazing. So look, we want to do this. We want a people-powered planet. We just have to be ready to stand up to the old powers. And I think that we have a lot of hope for that, because young people are growing up immersed in all these bottom-up ideas and technologies, and it's affecting them. It's very clearly affecting them. And so I'm very hopeful.
Perfect. Well, me too. I'm hopeful too. And with that, on that hopeful note, let's turn it over to Melanie for bringing in some of the questions from our club and our listeners.
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, Rob. Very exciting, especially the part about this has already happened in the past, so people can feel comfortable that, yes, we did it before, we could do it again, and look into the indigenous communities for help with that. So thank you for writing this book. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Incredible. Yes, we have questions. We want to go. First, we'd like to go to Andre. Andre, please unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
I think that there's an opportunity now that's offering the whole world to unite to do what you were talking about. And that is through a movement of nonviolence. Martin Luther King and Gandhi lived and died to teach us the way. And so my question that I put in the chat was that, well, what would the civil rights movement have done without Martin Luther King as a leader? There's a book that Randall Forsberg wrote with Elise Boulding called Abolishing War. And it was a debate on should there be bottom up or top down. And there was a panel that was reviewing it. And it was at the end, they determined that we need both.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm proposing and asking you about, is to say, well, now there's a plan for a global movement of nonviolence to bring the people together. And then the leaders are there to inspire and to bring in more people and to show and to be the lobbyists to the government, because the objective would be to influence the existing governments to change, because they're not going to change just by our politics. As an example, when the children were killed in Newtown, Connecticut, and Obama came out and said, let's get some new gun legislation, he said to the people, we're not going to be able to do it unless you rise up and make it happen. So yes, we need the people movement, the grassroots. So in finalizing, I'd like to say that there is a plan that for a global movement of nonviolence, and Secretary General Guterres from the UN set the precedent when he issued a call for a global ceasefire. It's right there at our fingertips. So I'd like to ask you all to investigate a strategy that I put together to get the Secretary General and the people together to promote the ceasefire. So please consider it.
So you ask about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a leader, but he was a bottom-up leader. He inspired people. He attracted people. And I think that's what we need. Unfortunately, so does Donald Trump. He does the same thing. They both had, King and Trump, both a lot of charisma going on there. And so that's, you got to get the right people to bring leadership and inspire people and attract them. And that's where the stories come in too. You know, I got very interested in stories, and for 6 years I ran a conference, the Storycon Summit Meeting on the Art, Science, and Application of Story, because I saw that there was the beginning of a science developing around how to make stories better and more powerful and stronger. And in recent years, I've been a consultant to politicians, because I really believe that if you want to convince people to do something, and it doesn't just apply to politicians, it's anybody who wants to make change happen. If you try to give them facts, which is what Democrats tend to do, be intellectual and give them information, you're going to reach part of their brain. But if you tell them stories and wrap the facts in stories, you're going to touch their hearts. And that is so much more powerful. I talk about the neurobiology of morality and the physiology of the way humans existed. That's wired into us genetically. Now, there's a thing called epigenetics. Epigenetics is how does what's programmed in you genetically come out? If I take a redwood seed and plant it in dry sand, nothing's going to happen. I put it in wet sand, we'll get a little sickly plant because there's no nutrients. I put it in the forest floor and you might get a 300-foot tall tree. Same genetics, different epigenetics. We all have the biology to be compassionate, empathic, caring, interdependent, cooperating people. That's the way we evolved. But our culture has blocked it, punished it, and made it so that people don't let themselves feel that way. We have to unleash that. That's what we need to do.
That is so interesting. I love how you put that. And I always say, you know, people are like plants, and different people need different things. And I love the putting us in the right soil so we can bring out what we naturally have. We'll go to John. John, if you'd like to ask your question or a comment.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Rob, very much. And I get your newsletter, by the way, which is great. How do you see cooperative societies fitting into the bottom-up government structure?
Well, I think a bottom-up government structure is going to be built based on cooperation. It's going to expect interdependence and cooperation. It's going to expect to have the people involved in making the decision. In some places, there's what's called the pirate party. And the pirate party basically delegates responsibility to different people who are trusted. So instead of saying, okay, you're a congressman representing 400,000 people, they're going to say, well, you're one of a bunch of people, and you may be the one who represents us for the budget, but you're not going to be the one who represents us for deciding on environmental issues or regulation of how employers treat employees. And I think that we have the technology now so that it doesn't have to be some regal senator or member of Congress who has all this power and influence. And once they're elected, they can forget about the interests of their constituents. I think that the constituents could play a much more powerful role. I mean, I can imagine, I think, you know, I recently interviewed someone who wrote a book about the rituals of elephants and other animals. And she basically described how powerful these rituals are in creating the culture. And I think that we can create rituals around cooperation, around interdependence, so that we can literally have a Thursday evening where there's a conversation about some issues and choices to be made. And people all get together then, and they can have a voice and they can decide. And there are different ways to do that, so that, you know, even if it's just a click on this is what I think, people could be involved in a much more direct way, much more direct democracy. We've got to break out of these old ways. You know, like the filibuster, a Supreme Court justice who's in charge for life just because one president appoints them. We've got a lot of archaic laws that we may be stuck with. I mean, the United States in particular, the idea that a state with 700,000 people gets the same two representatives as a state with 40 million people is obscene and crazy, but it's going to stay that way because they have power. And we have to figure out ways to replace that. And it's got to be replacement. It's got, you can't say we're going to get rid of this. You got to say, this is better. This is going to work better. This is going to make people happier and more successful. It'll make our country safer. And people have to demand it. And even then it's going to be hard. I mean, how many issues right now do 55 or 60 or 70% of the population want, but the Congress doesn't pass it because of a handful of powerful people? We've got to replace that.
Exactly. And thank you, John, for that question. So yes, we have two more quick questions before we close. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this has been one of the most interesting podcasts, and I've been involved from the very beginning. So Rob, thank you very much. Here's my question. What are your thoughts on religions? Will they exist in the future if it is a bottom-up world, or slowly disappear or morph into something else? 2,300 years or so, the Pisces age of religions and wars, versus the new Aquarian age is coming upon us, and it's the age of technology and peace.
Well, there are all kinds of religion. You know, the Catholic Church, if you look at it, it has an incredible hierarchy, a powerful hierarchy. But there are also lay groups, both within the Catholic Church and with other religious organizations, where people get together in each other's houses, and they share and they help each other. Every religion has both. They have top down and they have bottom up. And, you know, I think what's happening is more and more people are leaving organized religion. You know, organized religion wants you to have a lot of children. That's why they don't want any birth control or contraception or abortion. And that is something that is becoming less and less popular. So I believe it's less than half of the population now is involved in that. And I think it's going to keep shrinking and be replaced. I think, you know, having a meaningful way of thinking about the world and your relationship with it is a good thing, and it can be a very helpful thing. what's his name? I interviewed Houston. Was it John Houston? The guy who wrote one of the most popular books on religion years ago. And, he said people are happier if they have a spiritual practice to engage in. And to me, that makes some sense. I don't, but I think a lot of people do. And so I don't see that religion itself is the problem. It's the abuse of religion. Maslow talked about how the people who were the founders of religions were visionaries. The people who built the religions and created the structures, they were looking for power and money. They were the predators, and they used it. I'm working now on a project that hoping to turn into a book about the devil's Christians. Constantine in around 300 AD, he adapted Christianity for the Roman Empire, and he did it so that it would make his soldiers feel more powerful going into war. And they rewrote the Bible, and what they did was they kept in the parts that worked for Rome. They were the parts that worked for Constantine. And there are so many ways that modern Christianity is antithetical to the teaching of Jesus. And, I think it's not just Christianity either. It's all the Abrahamic religions. I have a little more hope in like Buddhism, which doesn't even consider itself a religion, really. But so I think that spirituality is a good thing. It's particularly institutional religion is a bad thing. And I think that the way to make it work better is to keep it local. Local is a really big concept for bottom up. Local is better than centralized, better than national, which is the one thing I have a concern about with a world nation, is that, the idea that it being centralized may cause a problem. But I think that can be resolved by keeping the power locally and by making the right choices.
Right. So the idea is that the people govern, and it's not just one, so bottom up, just like you said. Quick question from Glenn, or comment. We have time for you. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I had not offered a something orally here, but I did put a couple things in chat that I invite people to do. I very much appreciate the bottom-up approach instead of the top-down model. And I want to just invite anybody and everybody to participate in the workshops I conduct. They're free and online about nonviolent grassroots organizing. The principles of nonviolence are powerful and practical, and we need to do bottom-up things to change everything, including a foreign policy to be peaceful. We need to have a nonviolent economy. We need to radically overhaul our criminal justice system so we have a nonviolent criminal justice system. What we do to the environment and the climate is inherently violent. We need to have nonviolent ways of protecting the environment and the climate from corporate abuses and so forth. So I invite people to look in the chat and see the link I put in so you can sign up for my workshop. Some of the people here either are taking them currently or have taken them, and I invite the rest to join us too. They're free and online. So thanks.
Well, nonviolence includes civil disobedience, where you're going to get arrested. I did a couple of interviews with Daniel Ellsberg, and he's been arrested over 80 times. And I went to one event where he was protesting in front of the White House, where he and about 130 other people got themselves arrested protesting the Iraq war. And he gets a high off of it. Getting arrested is something that he enjoys. And I watched it happen, and it was kind of amazing. The Capitol Police knew him. They knew he was a hero. So they were so gentle with him, and they were gentle with all of the people being arrested, really. That's why I think what happened on January 6th was so different. The Capitol Police know how to handle protesters when they're civil and not violent. But I've done a series of interviews with protesters who have gone through civil disobedience. And like I interviewed Medea Benjamin on how to interrupt the president, because she did it with Obama. And so she gave concrete, very specific step-by-step instructions on what do you do before you are there, what do you do when you're there, what do you have prepared as you're getting ready to leave, getting dragged out by the guards, what do you have ready afterwards. I mean, these are all things that there's a craft and an art to that you can learn. And I agree 100%. Non-violence is the way that this has to happen. But that's on our side, and the other side is going to engage in violence. They will. And I hate to be a doubter on this, but that's going to happen. That's what billionaires are going to do. That's what generals are going to do. That's what senators and mayors and governors are going to do. That's what police are going to do. And so we have to think about how do we deal with that. And one of the great solutions that people have come up with is cameras. Just the truth, showing the truth is one great way to protect everybody. And as we develop these technologies and ideas, I think it's going to be more and more successful.
Yes, as we continue to develop it, and this new system has to include everybody. It has to include all those people you just mentioned, where it's worth it for them to be involved in it, and they think it's good for them as well. So not to keep them in power, but they're like, hey, this is a better system. I'll go with that. So including everyone, I think that's important too. This has been so interesting. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
So we're talking about the hero's journey. We're talking about getting a call to action, a call up to adventure. And so this system has to call people. It has to make them want to get involved so that they will take the steps to change their lives in a way that enables them to participate in it wholeheartedly.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you, everyone. My goodness, especially you, Rob. Wow. Quickly, back to Arthur. Arthur, back to you.
Thank you. I loved all the comments about nonviolence, because really violence has proven itself totally powerless when it couldn't beat, when mighty empires can't beat jungle people or tribesmen. But people power does have incredible power and can change the world. And we see that how the people power has brought down mighty dictatorships and so on. But what we haven't learned is how do we do people power governance? So what happens, these mighty dictators fall, and then they get replaced by another mighty dictator because there's a power vacuum and they jump in. So the task before us now is how do we evolve bottom-up people-powered governance? And that's what Gary was struggling with and talking about. Rob raised a very important point that, I'm worried about world government because, Gary says in our movie, does world government scare you? Well, it does me. If it's the same old forces of power and money controlling our lives from the top down. But what if we run it? What if we find out how to do that? How to have this new interactive bottom-up system of how all of us are governing our planet. And your book is such a great example of that, because all over you're talking about how people are learning how to do that, and that's percolating through our entire culture and society. And it's the way society is moving. It's sort of interesting. Everything else is moving into that kind of bottom-up way, but we're still stuck in these rigid nation-state systems, these political fictions. I mean, as Gary would say, you can look at the planet from outer space. I mean, there aren't all these countries. There's real bioregions and stuff. You can see those, but these other things are lines drawn on a map, and we fight and kill each other over them and threaten to destroy our entire planet over them. I know Gary used to use the term global. He loved the term global. I think he actually got it from his mayor there in Vermont, and talking with him, that it's global and local at the same time. It's decentralized, it's local, but why does it need the global component? Because otherwise the forces and powers that be won't honor our human rights. They'll destroy us. They'll destroy our entire planet. So we need a way to make laws that can save our planet from destruction, but not laws that are implemented with military force and with guns and bombs, but they're implemented by soft power, by people power, by it strikes me that even if we took existing world laws, which are so good, like Kellogg-Briand or the nuclear ban or the Treaty on the Rights of Women, all these things that the U.S. Senate has refused to ratify. Here we are saying we got to put sanctions and stuff in Afghanistan for violating the rights of women, and the U.S. hasn't even ratified the Treaty on the Rights of Women, or all the crucial treaties.
Well, speaking of women, in Occupy, and I went to 6 different Occupy locales and covered it extensively and supported it. One of the rules when you were to speak is they would create a list of people who wanted to speak. And the people who are at the front of the line were the people who have been marginalized in terms of having voices, women, people of color. And I noticed that outside of Melanie, who's an organizer over here, the women haven't had any chance to speak. So I want to know, does Joanne or Maria have anything to say?
Yes, good for you. Let's go women.
I was trying to think, because I'm a fan of the UN, and I appreciated Andre's pitch for the ceasefire, because I think that a lot of good has come out of the UN, even though it needs to be revised. I know that, and reconfigured, and you have to get rid of the veto power, et cetera. But do you envision down the road of any kind of structure that would be? I know there were efforts in the UN to create a people's assembly, where the representatives of individual organizations and local voices could be heard. I mean, that was the role of the NGOs. That's how the voices were included in the charter when they allowed NGOs. But do you envision any form of a structure that could bring together the voices of the disparate groups and coordinate them? Well, I don't know.
You just described it. I mean, I think it's certainly doable. It would be nice if the UN also allowed voices of independent groups within nations, like indigenous peoples, tribes, and what have you.
They've organized those. I mean, they brought the indigenous peoples together themselves. There's a Declaration for the Rights of the Indigenous, and then there's a Convention for the Rights.
That declaration is fabulous. It's wonderful, really. It's just we need more of that. We need to institutionalize it. And when I say institutionalize it, I mean make it a regular part of the conversation.
And a regular part of the UN with that People's Assembly Joanne was talking about. And that's what Gary called for, a People's World Assembly, to be a part of UN, and not to wait for the powers that be, the governments, to create it, for we the people to create it, and then let it merge into the UN, because it's got that power, because it's got so many people in it that the UN wants to have it as a part of it. I think with another Maria, did you have any comment, or Melanie?
Well, I just want to thank Rob again. Thank you, Rob, for all this insight, and appreciate you. And I'm hoping someday my vision, instead of we all come together where nobody pays attention whether someone's a woman or a man, and nobody's, I don't care. That's what I'm looking forward to, because I think that will help us the most. Not, if I had grown up where we didn't know what sex the presidents were, we didn't talk about that, nobody cares. Like, you don't care what sex your doctor is. If we didn't have anybody, we didn't even recognize that. And I think that's helpful. And especially in movies, when I find where it's pointed out, you woman, you're on the lower part of the stick or whatever. I think that's less helpful than having, nobody notice, oh yeah, she did something. Well, that's great. And not saying, oh, a woman did that, just that type of thing. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, but I'm so glad to have you here, and I'll back to Arthur again.
Good point, Melanie. And the whole question of bringing in people of color and all these people that Rob mentioned who were left out. At first in media, they made a point of that, but now the stories were so good because you don't even care if the person's what color there is, what race. It just sort of becomes just part of the natural story, and I think that's where we have to evolve to, where women and so on naturally have power, and where all of us find that feminine energy that's within us. That it's not just the women. All of us need that feminine power. So before we close, I want Rob to tell us, how do we get this? How do people get this extraordinary book? How do they subscribe to Op-Ed News? How do they get to be a part of this incredible bottom-up revolution with you?
Well, You can get the book at the places you buy books. You can get it from Op-Ed News. And you can join Op-Ed News. It's free to join. It's opednews.com. My personal website is robkall.com, where there's more information about me. And I'd love to hear from any of you. And if you write, I would love to publish your work on opednews.com.
Yes, it's a wonderful, wonderful platform to write. I've had several excellent, well, I don't know if they're excellent, but I thought they're excellent columns. I have great reactions from people to them. Op-eds that I've published in Rob's publication. And as he said, it is bottom up. Once you get to navigate the site and learn how to use it, you can publish your articles, you can edit them, you can change things you want, and then you can help reach targeted audiences with them. So it is a powerful way. All of you, each one of you are thought leaders, and your thoughts could be shared through Op-Ed News. So I do highly recommend it. And I recommend in your paid tiers, you actually get a copy of the book as part of the deal. So I recommend getting the book through Rob in one of the paid tiers, but then also getting the, as I did, the Kindle, so you can also work with it in a more integrative way. Thank you again, Rob, for just this extraordinary chance to talk to you, and for your extraordinary book and the extraordinary work you're doing in the world. I look forward to seeing you again as we work together, maybe on some of these media concepts of how we create that bottom-up hero's journey story. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.